today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. Doping expert or anti-doping expert, depending on who you ask, Victor Conte reacted to Alicia Baumgardner's public statement saying, "In my opinion, Alicia's statement about her 2 tests needs more clarity. It reminds me of Conor Benn's case that is also undecided. Some of it is opinion. Hair tests provide a different type of information than urine, but not superior. Both have limitations," responding to Alicia's assertion that hair follicle tests are in fact superior to urinalysis, but because urinalysis is cheaper, it's more uniform in the sport.
That's what she said in her statement.
Victor Conte says Alicia Baum certainly deserves a fair hearing, but saying hair tests have superior accuracy, reliability, that's an opinion. Urine has been the standard sample for steroid testing for decades. Hair tests provide historical data only. Who did the testing? In Alicia's lengthy public statement, it doesn't say what accredited lab she used to conduct the hair follicle tests, though I imagine it's stated in all the documents she provided the sanctioning bodies, the powers that be. She may not have mentioned the lab in her public statement, but she has to have mentioned that lab.
She has to have disclosed that information to them.
Victor Conte continued, "In my opinion, I'm now seeing the science argument seems like it may be used by Alicia Baumgardner as in the Conor Benn case. If so, then where is the quote-unquote science for review? Blood, urine, and hair all have value, but each also has limitations. Dark versus light hair can affect results," harkening back to Canelo Alvarez's situation with clenbuterol years ago and how he sought exoneration via hair follicle testing, most not realizing that hair follicle testing does have a flaw. In light-colored hair,
Like Canelo.
testing for clenbuterol, hair follicle testing may not be reliable. In any event, they went ahead with those tests, and it was those tests that quote-unquote exonerated him. The saving grace for Alicia is she doesn't have light-colored hair. Her hair is dark.
Beautiful.
Now, even if everything is exactly as she says it is, she is still at the mercy of the alphabet organizations, the sanctioning bodies, and how they wish to proceed. Though because it's a legal matter and because they may want to avoid a legal skirmish, they may so decide the independent research and documentation is satisfactory, thus allowing Alicia Baumgardner to resume her career uninterrupted, though the stigma will remain. We know how this works. To some people, once you pop hot, once you're dirty, you're always dirty.
To some people.
Some fighters, not saying that every fighter will so decide to forego a fight with Alicia, oust her from the sport, alienate her. I'm pretty sure she'll still be able to get opponents if she is allowed to resume her career, but perhaps high-profile opponents like Amandia Serrano or Michaela Mayer. Perhaps moving forward, they ain't gonna want nothing to do with Alicia.
They might not.
One that still could is Belgium's own former champion, Delphine Persoon, who is ranked as the #1 contender across the board with all 4 alphabet organizations. If Alicia remains undisputed super featherweight champion, it's looking a lot like she may end up fighting Delphine at some point next year. You have to imagine that at least one of these alphabet organizations is going to order the fight. Delphine is ranked #1 across the board.
It'd be pretty fucking peculiar that she's ranked #1 with all of them and not a single one orders the fight.
As she is clearly head and shoulders above all the other contenders and ranked ahead of all of them. So naturally, you would expect that somebody would order the fight next year. What is consistent is when you take a trip to each one of these alphabet organizations' websites, Alicia is still registered as their undisputed champion, and Delphine Persoon is registered as the #1 contender with every single one of them.
It's a fight that, if they make it, could get a lot of attention next year because Delphine Persoon, unofficially, to some, beat Katie Taylor, beat her in their first fight, beat her years ago. A matchup between her and Alicia Baumgardner
could make people forget at least momentarily, could make people forget about Alicia's anti-doping fiasco and focus on the fight. Focus on the fight between her and Delphine, as it would be a good one, and a dangerous one for Alicia. The contrasting styles, the come-forward, aggressive volume puncher versus the hard-punching finesse fighter, pure boxer.
I think Alicia has more single punching power in a single punch than Delphine does, but she doesn't throw as many punches as Delphine, as many punches in a round, so things could get interesting.
Cross that bridge when we get to it. We have yet to see if Alicia Baumgardner is fully cleared and able to resume her career uninterrupted.
She said in a public statement that her team was already in the process of booking her next fight, and if they do, then we'll know she's in the clear. She's free to go.
In men's junior middleweight news, Bohachuk versus Fundora. World Boxing Council approves interim title fight, no mandatory named at this time, for Jermell Charlo at junior middleweight. I don't actually think he's going to be returning to junior middleweight. Better still, a ruling was made during the 61st annual WBC convention that would allow Fundora to re-enter the interim title mix. It would come versus Sergey Bohachuk in lieu of a previously contracted rematch versus Brian Mendoza, against whom he suffered a stunning 7th-round knockout defeat this past April to abruptly end his secondary title reign. The World Boxing Council had the flexibility to make it possible for the Undisputed Championship. WBC President Mauricio Suleiman stated prior to issuing the divisional ruling, the WBC had the Jermell Charlo versus Brian Castano fight and ordered a rematch for the Undisputed. At that time, the WBC ordered an interim to keep activity for the boxers to have opportunities.
After Sebastian lost to Brian Mendoza, there was some brief talk about staging a rematch, but that all quickly got scrapped when Brian ended up taking a fight with Tim Tszyu, and we know what happened. Tim Tszyu dominated him.
Sebastian Fundora won and defended the title. He lost in a dramatic way to Brian Mendoza, and they had signed a contract for a rematch. That rematch did not happen because Mendoza went to Australia to face WBO champion Tim Tszyu. The WBC accepted Sergey Bohachuk to fight Sebastian Fundora for the interim title.
Sergey Bohachuk, who's pretty big for this weight, perhaps not quite as big as Sebastian Fundora, but he's pretty tall for a junior middle, standing in at about 6 foot even, sporting a professional record of 23 wins with 1 loss, no draws, 23 knockouts.
Having been knocked out at least once in 24 professional bouts. That knockout came at the hands of Brandon Adams about 2 years ago. He has rebounded off that loss since then. He's coming off of consecutive victories and consecutive knockouts. What you will notice is that every single fight that Sergey has won, he's won by way of knockout. So this is a big puncher.
Can be caught, though. He has been caught. What is the caveat of being a mid-range to inside fighter that opens up as much as Sergey opens up is that you're open to be caught in between the punches, in between the shots.
Though we could say the exact same thing about Sebastian Fundora. He was caught by Brian Mendoza quite violently, sat on his back pocket, attempting to rebound off that loss. You look at Sergey in action, and you get the sense that it could be a tough night's work for Sebastian Fundora, a hard night at the office, that he needs a rebound fight, but this is a difficult guy to rebound with. Ukraine's Bohachuk.
He's won 5 fights in a row since March of 2021, when he suffered his first professional loss at the hands of Brandon Adams, who I mentioned.
Not a single one of those fights that Sergey Bohachuk had since losing to Brandon Adams, not a single one of those fights went the distance. He's coming off of consecutive knockouts and stoppages. So he is a puncher of some scale, and Sebastian Fundora being a puncher himself, opening up as much as he does. A fight between him and Sergey looks to be an all-action shootout, and a hard night at the office for a fighter who's attempting to rebound off a loss. I mean, you were just in there with a puncher, and now you're about to climb back in there with another one.
This fight would presumably go down at some point next year. I don't know, January, February.
This fight being for WBC interim status, what that essentially means is that Sebastian will continue to campaign as a junior middleweight. And given his frame, how statuesque he is, I would have figured maybe he wants to go to middleweight. That's got to be an easier weight for him to make than junior middle, being what, 6'3", 6'4", weighing 154 pounds?
Somebody get that kid a sandwich.
Perhaps what he figures is that his best bet to become a champion is at junior middle, because Jermell, he's not coming back to junior middle. Whatever belts he holds there, sooner or later, they're all going to go vacant. So if he becomes interim champion again, he will be in position to become a champion himself. That he can do this sooner rather than later at junior middle than middle. Perhaps that's why he's staying there.
Though he's got his work cut out for him with this guy. There are easier fights to make, easier guys to fight than this guy when you're on the bounce.
And it will probably end up on one of the 3 fight dates the PBC has lined up between January and February, all of which are registered as being pay-per-views.
I don't know who's going to be headlining.
Though I have to admit, it has all the makings of a very intriguing fight and entertaining fight. It's a lot more ambitious matchmaking than we're used to seeing from the PBC, though, given their circumstances. They need to make the most entertaining fights they can make, the best fights they can make. This one promises to be a barn burner if they get it over the line. And finally, just in keeping with the theme of all things junior middleweight, Jermell Charlo vacates IBF title ahead of Bakhram Murtazaliev purse bid. Bakhram Murtazaliev will face the next highest ranked contender, presumably Germany's own Jack Colquet, for the belt. Murtazaliev will be ordered to face the next leading available contender for the title. Jack Colquet currently sits at number 2 after amassing an 8-fight winning streak since his 2019 loss to Sergey Derevyanchenko, but the IBF's press release claims Murtazaliev's opponent is yet to be determined. Having previously sacrificed the WBO belt to fight Canelo Alvarez last month, Charlo is down to just the WBC and WBA titles, both of which I expect him to also vacate. The WBC revealed last week that with their interim belt vacant following Brian Mendoza's loss to Tim Tszyu, Sebastian Fundora and Sergey Bohachuk will square off for it, while Charles Conwell faces a opponent yet to be announced in a final eliminator, assuming the WBA actually enforces its own rules. That leaves mandatory challenger Israel Madrimov as Charlo's presumptive next opponent, a fighter who's been fighting over there on the matchroom side of things. I don't expect that fight to materialize either.
This is what I told you would happen.
Now, as it pertains to Bakhram Murtazaliev, who just so happens to be managed by Egis Klimas. Egis, he does a lot of business with the people over there at Top Rank. Bakhram Murtazaliev has been on the PBC side of things for some time now, but they haven't been pushing him per se. They haven't been promoting him. His fights have been happening on the non-televised portion of their shows.
They're not invested in him. And if Jermell Charlo has so decided to vacate the IBF title, it has to be because that's the cheapest alternative in this situation. They're not in a position to spend money on that fight.
Think about it. Jermell Charlo just fought Canelo Alvarez up there at 168. Do you really think he wants to drop back down to 154 to fight this guy for way less money than he just made with Canelo, boiling back down to 154?
No, I think what he wants to do is take a little bit of time off and spend some of that money that he made in the Canelo Alvarez fight. When he does come back, it won't be at 154. It will likely be at 160.
His brother, Jermall, who hasn't fought in 2.5 years but still reigns as WBC champion at middleweight, he's going to fight this weekend on the undercard of Benavidez versus Andrade against Jose Benavidez. If he takes care of business, I anticipate he's going to campaign as a super middleweight moving forward. He'll be at super middle, Jermell will be at middle, and Jermell will likely take on Carlos Adames for what could be the WBC title.
What about Bakhram?
Well, the IBF doesn't look to be elevating him to full champion straight away, in spite of him having waited since 2019 for this opportunity. They're going to make him fight. They're going to make him fight for the belt. They're not doing with him what they just did with Jaron Boots Ennis, elevating him to full champion status straight away.
They're saying that he may end up fighting Jack Colquet. And Bakhram Murtazaliev versus Jack Colquet is not the kind of fight that the PBC can afford to spend money on. Not right now. They don't have a broadcast partner.
So I don't know. Maybe what Aegis Climas will elect to do in this situation is see if the people at Top Rank, who he does a lot of business with, see if they don't pay for the fight. And if they don't pay for the fight, maybe Jack Colquet's people will pay for the fight. The people over there in Germany, where he's based out of. And if everything works out for Bakhram Murtazaliev, if he becomes IBF champion, then maybe Aegis will funnel him over to Top Rank on the premise that he has a world title, and maybe Top Rank can find use for him.
Now, even with that IBF title, there's not much money in promoting Bakhram Murtazaliev's fights. The real value of promoting Bakhram Murtazaliev, if he does become IBF champion, is making a fight between him and Tim Tszyu.
The people at No Limit Promotions in Australia who promote Tim Tszyu's fights are planning a fight here in the United States sometime next year in the second quarter in Las Vegas, some kind of kickoff rugby thing where they're expecting a lot of Australian tourists to land right here in the US of A. And as a part of that event, they want to do a no-limit promotion where Tim Tszyu will headline. So what better fight to make than a unification match between Tim Tszyu and the winner of Murtazaliev versus Colquet whenever that fight happens?
There's a lot of moving parts. For you to be able to do that, you've got to do the Colquet versus Murtazaliev fight sometime in January, I think, to be able to do the fight between the winner and Tim Tszyu in the second quarter of next year. So they would be pressed for time.
To see what I mean? Even with the IBF title, there's not much money in promoting Bakhram Murtazaliev. The real money, the real point, would be making a fight between him and someone else, another champion at the weight, namely Tim Tszyu, who just so happens to be in the market for a new U.S. broadcast partner since Showtime has left the sport.
They're not going to be showing his fights or anybody else's fights after this year.
Tim needs a new U.S. broadcast partner, the people at Top Rank. They have worked with one or two Australian promotional outfits and fighters before, so the partnership would be ideal, though that's just me bouncing ideas around. There's no official word of Tim going into business with Top Rank. I'm just brainstorming.
And I've said that before. As it pertains to the other two alphabet titles that Jermell Charlo still has, the WBA title and the WBC, I anticipate in time he's going to vacate those titles too.
At some point he'll vacate the WBA title. At some point, might take a while, in the WBC, that will go to the winner of Fundora versus Bohachuk, which we just talked about. Jermell is done at junior middleweight.
I've been telling you guys that for over a year now. He's done it that way. After the Brian Castano fight, I didn't feel he would fight there again, and look.
He's not.
He's not going to.
Next time we see that guy, maybe we see that guy at middleweight.